What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to a new episode of Talk of the Town. This is a podcast where we talk about creators, startups, media, and more. My name is Tristin. I'm the host of the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you're returning from previous episodes of the podcast, thank you so much for stopping by and listening to a new episode. Today, we got a really special guest, someone who I've actually known for quite some time in the startup and the venture space. I could probably do a good enough introduction, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Sarah, introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Sarah Romanko, and I've been active in the startup and VC space since 2019, had several different roles at VC firms, been involved with all parts of the VC investment process. I also love speaking at events, and since last year, I've had the opportunity to speak at 30 events, including the Texas Venture Gala and Forum, Columbia University, and also several different events here in the startup and VC space. I'm really excited to kind of dive in and share more about my background.
Yeah, so Sarah, where are you from? What was your childhood like growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. Then I went to school in Dallas, and then I missed Austin, so I moved back. But I really like this question because I think my childhood was very unique in the sense that I've always really loved school. I've always really enjoyed working hard, and I've always really liked to learn. And I think that really played an important role early on. My parents never forced me to do well in school. They never really forced me to do homework. I just kind of did it because I loved it. And I think a really entertaining story was when I was in kindergarten and I was doing some homework. I loved it so much I actually did it twice because I was like, I want to learn. And I think it's just really funny because I genuinely had so much fun doing it. And I think that just kind of has progressed throughout my entire career where I've just sought a way to learn something new.
Was there a particular subject that you were always fond of? Was it, math, or was it writing or history, or what was it?
Yeah, I have to think about that. I think I was interested in a lot of different subjects growing up. I know that early on, especially in elementary school, I did have an affinity for math. One thing I actually did, we were trying to learn the times tables in elementary school, and I was trying to see how quickly I could learn them. And my dad and we would practice flashcards, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. And I think also, too, I really enjoyed business. Like, I didn't know it at the time, but when I was younger, my school had various opportunities to kind of learn more about business. And an example of that was coming up with our own business idea and actually having like a little mini store. It was kind of like an entrepreneurship market. And we would kind of have the different like grade levels would kind of come in and we try to sell our product to them. And so like that wasn't necessarily a subject, but it was like really fun. And I didn't really know it at the time because I was like, oh, this is just fun. I'm just learning different things. But I think the kind of combination of like math and business and loving that has really explained a lot in terms of my career path over the past several years.
Yeah, it's funny for me. Like, I grew up in a family where, like, finance or sort of like investing was a thing. And then it's funny, I'm the only one in my family that really sucked at math. For me, I was always fond of history and writing. Um, and to the point where I had like teachers who they were like, write about whatever you want and we'll grade you on that versus like, here's the assignment and go from there. So I think like that was always my strong suit, but no, I love hearing that. So, where did you go to college? What was that experience like? And, what are some of the fun things that you did?
Yeah, so I went to school at the University of Texas at Dallas. It's located in Richardson, but it has Dallas as the name just because it's the bigger city. I majored in general business, so a business administration with a concentration in innovation and entrepreneurship. What that means is it's not a minor, but it's basically like a focus where you can take additional classes and just kind of specialize. And my college experience was very pivotal for me because I think it kind of centered the fact that I'm really able to go into a new environment and build relationships with people. When I got to college, I didn't know anybody. No one from none of my friends, no one from my school that I was close with was going there. And so I really had to learn from day one, how do I make friends? How do I stand out? And while I was in college, I also started a club And I was also kind of helped me meet people. But day one, I was like going up to people and I was like, hey, like, do you want to join my club? Do you want to like hang out? Like just like literally day one when I arrived on campus, I started doing that. And I think that the fact that I could do that really made sense for my career now, because I'm used to going to events. You go up and meet people, you approach them. I do a lot of like cold outreach online. So I think like a lot of it just really made sense to me. But I think just getting that experience of doing a lot of entrepreneurship things in college, working for some VC firms, working for startups. Like, I think just all of this, like, it explains a lot. Like, I didn't know it then, but I think it was just a really unique experience I had. And just, I found my community in college, honestly. Like, I just love that time. Like, I look fondly on that. I had fun, but I also, had time to learn, and it was a perfect combination.
Absolutely. Was there a particular instructor that you had that, really, I think, mentored you, or as well, any like advice that someone once gave you that really like set you ablaze?
Ooh, I like this. Well, I had this professor. His name's Professor Polsey, and I had him my freshman year and my senior year. And what I really liked about him was his teaching style, and that he really encouraged us to learn and have fun with learning. And that really, I just really resonate with that, because obviously, you have to get good grades to pass your classes. But for me, like and I did end up getting really good grades in college, but I always approached my classes from the idea of, how can I learn? How can I do my best? And he always encouraged us to be creative. We had these really fun assignments where each week we would have to like answer a prompt, but we would be encouraged to answer it creatively. So like one time I ended up building the structure out of like note cards to demonstrate the prompt. Another time, I made a board game. So like things that are super like out there, but it's just part of like being creative. And I think that was great, because in the real world, it's not always going to be, okay, you just go on Google and you just find your answer. Sometimes you have to think outside the box. And that's kind of, what we do in the startup and VC world, is like, how can you go like do something no one else has ever done before? And so that was so fun for me. And then another great example was my senior year. We were supposed to do like a project, about anything to teach the class. And so one of my hobbies is arcades. And I taught the class how to win at crane games. And that was one of my senior projects. And it's like being able to talk about something I'm passionate about, but there's skills that are really valuable that go beyond just, okay, I need a good grade. It's, let me have fun. Can you teach people something that's actually really hard to do? Like, crane games are notorious. Like, people spend like hundreds of dollars on them, and I've pretty much mastered them. So like I can go on and on about that, but I think it's just like, it just was really meaningful for me. And he was just always really supportive of my career, always very helpful. Everyone just loved him, honestly. And he's still there. He's still a great professor. And I always tell people, yeah, if you go to UT Dallas, make sure you get him as a professor, because it'll really change your trajectory in college.
Now, one of the questions I always ask people is, there's still this sort of like uh, tug of war between, is college worth it or not these days? Do you think that college is still worth it for people who want to get into business and especially venture capital? Or on the inverse, do you think, theoretically, you could have gotten to where you are without college?
I like this question. And I think that how I'm going to answer this is based on my experience, but I also do want to be very clear on what my like overall thoughts are. So I think for me personally, college was very important in helping me get to my career. And the reason being is that, venture capital is very hard to break into. And I had my first venture capital experience in college. And the reason I got that was because of the work that I had done at my school through my various clubs. I built relationships, and being able to do that is what helped me get that role. Now, I also do know stories of people who have not had the traditional like college background, and they've also broken into VC. And so I think that the way I like to approach it is that I think everybody has a different path. Some people, college is a great fit for them. Some people, it's not. And I think regardless of how people get to their, career in venture or career in any other industry, I think it should be respected, because like for me, like having my degree was a lot about the learning, what I like, the skills that I developed. Like, obviously, the classes were really useful, but a lot of it was just who I became in my like growth throughout college. But there are also ways to grow outside of college. So I think I wouldn't answer it as like it's good or bad. It's more of like, hey, there's a different path for everybody. And I think that that path like is going to work out for you and what's best. Like I've talked to some students who are like, hey, like, I'm in college and maybe I want to drop out and start a company, or well, not drop out and start a company, drop out and continue working on my company because it's doing well. And like that's also great too, because if you have a good company and like, it's growing, you should pursue that and take that risk. You can always go back to college later if you choose. And so I think it's like figuring out what works best for you in your stage of life, because you never want to force something on someone if it's not a fit. And I always, for me, like college was always good for me, and that was what I always believed in. But like, one day whenever I have kids, if they're like, hey, I don't think college is a fit for me, I want to start a company, I will 100% support that. Like, I think you do what works best for you, and I will always be a supporter regardless of what that is.
Absolutely. The other thing that I think is interesting is not only did you, help build the entrepreneurship club at UT Dallas, you also, switched over to the venture side with their seed fund. Was that sort of a comfortable transition? And then also, like, what were some of the fun moments of being part of that project?
Yeah, for sure. No, it was an amazing transition, and I'm glad you asked about that because there's kind of a story behind it. So like I kind of always wanted to do the seed fund at UT Dallas, like and for those that are listening, like finding participating in a seed fund or something similar at your university, or if you're not in school, just like a early program in VC is a great opportunity just to learn and kind of get some experience. But I think for me, like I always wanted to do it, like ever since like I got to college, but it was a challenge for me because it was literally a scheduling conflict why it took so long for me to take it. So that's just kind of a side comment. But in terms of the program, it was it was so valuable for me because I actually got to source companies. I got to learn how to evaluate them. I got to learn from an instructor who has actually invested before. He started a company, like my instructor actually works at Capital Factory. And so it was just so valuable to learn from him. And then actually getting to meet with founders, go through the investment process, then go through the process of meeting with experts and learning from those experts. I think it's just so important to be able to get experiences like that. Like I said, regardless of if you're in school or not, just to be able to have something on your resume, not just for being on your resume, but I genuinely enjoyed it. Like some people took the class and said, hey, this isn't a fit for me, but I'm glad I took it. I was like, I want to do this for my career. Like I could do this 24/7. I love this. I think it was just the excitement of learning about new companies and really just diving deep into different markets. Like, and I can't, unfortunately talk too much about the companies just because, of confidentiality. But what I will say is that it was industry agnostic. And so we got to look at companies in a lot of different areas. And that was just a lot of fun, just genuinely. Like I loved it, and I would 100% do it again if I could.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that I've always respected about you, especially like when we've first connected a few years ago, is like most people are just very focused on like doing sort of job positions and then going from there. I think what's really catapulted your career in so many ways was that once you were part of UT Dallas, and even after, you continuously kept getting these fellowships, at like GenZ Scouts and Moonshots and a bunch of other places as well. That I think really, and this is my outside observation, like I think allowed you to sort of become into your own, and at the same time, I guess like build character. Is that like a good um summarization?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I think that you're 100% correct. Like, I think doing a lot of different opportunities was very valuable for me because each different program I've done and each different VC I've worked for has had a lot of different areas that they cover. So, for example, in some roles, that I've had, it's, directly sourcing companies, it's evaluating them, doing the whole VC investment process. In other roles, a lot of it's like networking, meeting people who are also interested in the same part of VC as you are. Other ones are focused on, okay, let's do a lot of like deep topic research. So for example, like Venture Institute, I actually dove in and each week would write pages upon pages, literally, if I look back at my assignments, of topics in VC. So doing a lot of research. And so I think like it really taught me how to go into different parts of VC. And I do apologize, my AirPods are falling out, but going into different parts of VC and really understand, what do you want to do in a VC career? Because there's a lot of different parts of VC. Like a lot of people think, okay, I want to go into VC, I want to do investing, like that's it. But, as I got further into it, I learned, okay, there's platform, there's operations, and realizing that there's other parts of VC that I truly love, and being able to combine all of those interests into one. I think that's also what was great about all of these different opportunities I've had. And that's also, I think, another thing too, and you didn't ask this, but I do want to add on, is the reason I was able to get all these opportunities is because I genuinely like to take time for the community that helps support me and give back. And that's why I've been able to, like, some of these roles I've gotten, people reached out to me on LinkedIn and were literally like, hey, would you like to do this? Like, it wasn't like I had to have a formal interview process for some opportunities, just because of my reputation. And that's something that I really tell a lot of people I meet with, like founders, students, ecosystem builders, like really like new VCs. I'm like, if you truly care about helping without expecting anything in return, it's going to come back to you. And that's just been so meaningful to me, because I remember when I was really young, I had someone referred me to a VC role and I got it. And then now I get to do the same thing for people. And so to have things come full circle, it's like, I can't describe how good it feels. Like, that's better than like, okay, I've sourced a really great company and, I've got maybe like, like things going well, like at the job I'm working. Like, the most fulfilling thing is when you can help somebody. And it's like, it's just, I don't know. I honestly just can't put it into words. Like, it just feels good in your soul.
Yeah, and for context, right? We're talking you were one of 43 out of 300 for Gen Z Scouts, one of 21 for Hawk, and then again, like the stops at Venture Cooperative, Pineapple, Bullet Pitch, which I still love Brett and what he's doing with that project. I'm honestly amazed every single day that I see like the craziness that they're working up, and I'm like, I don't know how you're doing this, but cool. Like I think was it they just did Tech Week in New York,
Yes.
and they rented out like hundreds of cabs for Bullet Pitch, and like ad space for founders, and I'm like, that's insane. So as time has progressed with you in like your career, again, with all these like interesting places and like um groups that you've sort of had a hand with being a part of, what's sort of the lessons that you learned and mistakes that you made along the way?
Yeah, so I think one really big mistake, and I think like because I like to be very transparent. I think that's part of my brand. But I mentioned earlier, when I was in college, I started a chapter, or I started a club. For more context, it's called Skills USA, and they're a national organization. Super passionate about them, been involved since I was in high school. But ultimately, one of the biggest mistakes I made was not being able to, I don't say like mistake or like learning experience, but I started the club when I was a freshman. But when I graduated, the club unfortunately fell apart. And I'm still involved with Skills USA, just not at the university level. Like, I did some volunteering with them. But I think for me, like having that experience of starting something and not having it like work out the way I wanted was very like humbling, but also very challenging, because I learned a lot about starting something and having that journey of, you've put your heart and soul into something, you really believe in it, it's helped you, you want it to help other people. And like part of the reason why it didn't work out was because COVID happened. We had some challenges with that, but also I just personally could have been a better leader, learning some different challenges just with the club itself and the management and how I was running it. And I think for me, it was like, okay, now I know it didn't go well. So now in the future, if I were to start something, even though, people would say, oh, it's just a club, I would say, well, yes, maybe it's quote unquote just a club, but it's more than that. It's like you're actually starting something, you have to build it. And so I think for me, I'm like, now I kind of know what it takes to be a great leader because I've had that experience, but then I've also had all these other experiences like after that where I know how to run something well. So I think like, I don't know if I want to say mistake or how to phrase it, but I think like that is like having an experience where something doesn't work out can be really, really rewarding. I think also too, like I want to highlight the fact that even though I have all these great roles that I've done in my career, there's also what people would call their like resume of failures, of things they've applied to and they haven't gotten. I have so many of those. And I think it's important to kind of show that for just as many successes, there's just as many failures, right? And so, when I remember when I graduated college, I had applied for this VC role. I was so close to getting it. I didn't get it. I was like devastated. And I learned a lot from that, like what worked, what didn't. But I think like just saying like, okay, I've had a lot of things that worked, but the reason I've had so many things that worked is because I've also had so many things that didn't work. And, I think that's just really taught me a lot in my career of like, what do you need to do to learn from an experience and then just move forward, even if it's going to be really, really hard.
Now, one thing that you mentioned, and I want to sort of dive a little bit deeper to that, is you said you could have been a better leader.
Yes.
What is your mindset on what makes a great leader?
Yeah, so I think what makes a great leader is someone who's really able to embody, well, I'm not saying embody, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but someone who's able to really bring out the best in their team. For me, like, it's never been about the title. Like, a title to me is just a way to, like, it's just for like logistical purposes, right? Like, I think people can rise to the occasion regardless of what their title is. And so I think like the issues that I specifically had was addressing conflict, right? So if there was an issue, I wasn't the best at addressing it. And now I'm a lot better at addressing conflict. But I think if you're really the best leader, your employees, your team are going to feel empowered. They're going to love working with you. They're not going to be afraid to tell you when there's a problem. I kind of think of it like an open door policy. It's kind of how I embody it. It's like if I lead a team, I want it to feel like, yes, maybe I'm quote unquote their boss, but like I want it to feel like we're equals. And that the reason I embody that is because in a lot of my roles, I may not have been like my title may not have been like the highest title, but the work I was given was like I had a higher title because they trusted my work ethic, my experience, and I was given a lot of responsibility and I was treated with the same respect, a GP might be treated with. And so I think that to me is like one day whenever I'm running a company, like that's exactly what I want to do because I think you have to really respect your employees, but also remember that they're human because sometimes like, like I know for me in some of my roles, like even just recently, like for example, I got pretty sick after South by Southwest and my company was very understanding. And I think just like having a place where, if you have something personal going on, the leader will understand and respect that. And if you go on LinkedIn, you see a lot of LinkedIn posts where someone's like, oh, like, I had to take time off to go on vacation or, and my company was so respectful of that. Like, I love companies like that because it's not even about being good PR. It's just like, if you're a good company, I think it's just good karma that you get ultimately. I think like things come full circle and that's kind of my belief. And, like I think if you're a good leader, people respect you and then something good will happen in the future for your company and for your team.
The other thing that you talked on was about how the seeing the failure of the entrepreneurship club. Once you progress through your academic journey. Does that did that help you become like more relatable to founders and saying, look, I know what it's like to build something and it not necessarily work out. And is that a lesson that you think has helped you?
I would say 100%. Like I think when my, when Skills USA, like the UT Dallas chapter of Skills USA, because Skills USA is a national organization, so I say the chapter. So when the chapter didn't work out, I think that really did, in a sense, make it more relatable. Yes, but one thing I've also been very careful and very respectful when I talk to founders is that I like to tell them like even though like this club didn't work out, it's and I did have that experience of building something and not working. it's not the same as having investment in a company and it not working and losing like personal money. And so whenever I am talking to founders and I'm in that seat where I'm like giving them advice, I like to always be very honest of what I do and don't know and never try to try to pretend like I'm something I'm not. And so I'll be like, here's what I have done, here's what I haven't done. You can take it or leave it type thing. Because I know a lot of times, sometimes like VCs will say, hey, like they'll basically pretend like they know something they don't. And I think it's like, it to me that just doesn't feel very honest, because I think like you have to like tell a founder like honestly what your background is. Like if a founder is coming to me and they have an idea and I don't have a lot of background on it, I might say, hey, this is general advice. I don't have expertise in this area. This is what I think, but here's someone who's more qualified to speak on this. Because I think this also goes to being a good leader, but a good leader also knows what they don't know and is not afraid to admit that they don't know something. I think that's what I've seen a lot of great leaders do, is they said, hey, like, I don't know this, and that's okay, but here's how I'm going to learn it, as opposed to just like saying, oh, like I know everything, like I'm going to learn all this, like I already know it. And so that's that, like, and I think that that's kind of the long answer to your question, of saying like, yes, it helped, but also me being very clear on what that experience was, and not trying to, you know, I don't know what the word for it is, but like trying to like pretend like it was starting a company when it was starting something, starting a club, right? Not diminishing that, but being honest with what it was.
Yeah, it's not a one-to-one comparison.
Exactly.
So, fast tracking a little bit, you were an advisor for a few different groups, Able Partners on their Gen Z board. You also got to work at Boss Me In. How important is it for those that don't know that there's a seat at the table in venture for females and for female founders?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely important, because I think like, me being female, me getting into VC, and learning that not only just there's not a lot of females, but there's not a lot of diverse perspectives, individuals, all backgrounds. And by diverse, I mean non-traditional backgrounds. I mean ethnicity. I mean like where you're from. Like it can be anything. Like I think that encompasses a lot of it, right? And so I think like it's very important to have that, have diverse VCs, but also just diverse founders, because I think there's a lot of really great business ideas out there, and it's important that VCs can understand them and help them get funded. So, like at Boss Me In, a female-led, female-founded company, and very, very great mission. Ultimately, had to leave my role because I was starting a new role, and I didn't have time to continue that one. But I think it's just I think just having that experience and seeing like working for a female-led company was very empowering. Also at Able Partners, I think what was great is, speaking of diversity, their advisory board, they brought in Gen Z from across the country who had, I mean, it was just great because we all had completely different perspectives, and you could get a very good makeup of what does Gen Z think, because you're hearing all these different perspectives, things that you never would have considered. And that's what's really, really great. And that's what I'm hoping that the VC industry can kind of change towards, because I think the statistics are really not that good, honestly. Like I want to decrease the funding gap. People say, why are you in VC? That's why. I'm also passionate about working with founders, but I think decreasing the funding gap is my, I guess, kind of like my tagline, in a sense of why it's so important to me, because I personally face challenges and I don't want other people to have to face those in the future.
Absolutely. So this is the point in time with the podcast where I like to throw the wrench into the plans, as I mentioned before we were recording, and let you sort of hijack the show, and bring up questions or topics that you want to talk about. So, Sarah, the microphone is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm really excited about this because I do so many different networking calls, and I love asking questions. So one thing I kind of wanted to dive into, now that I've had some time over like just getting to learn more about your background and different calls we've done, but I wanted to kind of understand more about how you view your role at Spark, how you view your role investing, considering you've had all these conversations, with founders, kind of with like content creators, with VCs, and like how that's kind of approached your investment strategy and what you invest in.
Yeah, I've always looked at my role with Spark as like just trying to help as many founders as I can. I think the thing I've always said is like being based in Nebraska where there is a lot of like innovation and entrepreneurship happening is great. But the thing is like Spark is Nebraska based, globally focused. And I think that's something where that was always our strength. I think my background with being in content and like marketing and like knowing what it's like having to do social media and advertising, um, I think that's also helped because a lot of founders, they're very product driven and idea driven. And then I'm like, how are you actually going to like grow this? Because I'm like, the marketing has to be done a certain way to where it'll take off, you know? So I think that's always something, but the biggest thing for me is like I'm very fortunate where I've been able to launch multiple different startups, attempt different ideas. You know, the pandemic gave me a lot of time when not able to travel to sort of do things. And so I've used that experience and as well, talking to other people to really mold the way I do investing, the way that I do startup advisory through Spark is like I tell people I know what it's like being in the shoes of having to try and scale a business, with limited financing. I know what it's like, having to compete against, dozens of players in the same space or, indirectly or indirectly. But I also, tell them I'm like, I know what it's like when you're going through the burnouts and the stress and the dark moments of building a company. So that's something. But I think when I'm investing in startups, I I joke that right now I have a list more of the companies that I have not invested in that eats me up inside versus the companies that I have invested into. And so, one, I keep that list just to remind myself to be like humble and be like, not you're never gonna get every single investment that you want. And additionally, it's a great starting point of a list for when I do like another venture raise for the fund, where then I can just go, these are all the companies that I do want to target, so that I don't have to say what if again. Um, but no, I think that's a really good question. I think on the content side of things, it's helped a lot because like with running the podcast, running the newsletter, having a YouTube channel, having a brand that's predominantly culture and lifestyle and gaming, I've been able to tell founders, look, if you want free ad space, if you want free awareness, I'm like, I've got the distribution to do it. And frankly, I think I was doing it, albeit smaller than a lot of the other sort of creator investors that you see out there. I think the Charlie D'Amelios of the world or the Mr. Beasts of the world who are out there building their own businesses or investing in other people is tremendous. I can never do that scale of project though.
And I think one thing that you said that was really interesting. Well, there's a lot of different things, but I think about having how there's a lot of like content creators that are actually investing in companies, and they're actually C firms that are investing in content creators and investing in those companies. So I was kind of curious, like if kind of what your thoughts are on this kind of new trend, because I've been reading a little bit more about it, and or so VCs, let me clarify, so VCs not just investing in like companies made by content creators, but some of them actually take equity in the content creator themselves, so they're taking equity in that content creator's brand. So this like I think like you're the perfect person to talk about this, because this you've had experience with like a lot of content creators. So like I just am really excited to hear about this, because I've done a little reading on this, but I just want someone's perspective who knows a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's always funny that I work in venture capital. Yet I've told people, you could write me a 9-figure check for any one of the startups I'm actively running, and I will rip the check up and overnight mail it back to you. And I know now, like, people are like, that's not how venture works. Everything's done by wire transfer. I get it. But, I think it's more of that principle of like, I don't need that money. But no. Um, when it comes to like venture and creators, like, yeah, there's now this growing trend where you do see companies or other creators investing in other creators. There was Red and Link, who they saved Smosh and brought it back from sort of the brink of death. We've seen this with other creators as well, who are sort of trying to give their community an equity share of profits from YouTube channels that they run. I think on the creators investing in companies and sort of being a figurehead, I think that's always been an interesting play because it's great for the founders and it's great for the creators. One, because for those creators you get guaranteed ad revenue and the ton of money on the back end. But also, like, you are supporting great founders at the same time. um, I think that very much like how people are in the sports space, you're starting to see elements of that like business mindset start to creep into the content space, and it's something that even like I've had to educate smaller creators on, is like, hey, you might only have like 1,000 or 2,000 followers on Twitch and Twitter combined. Still go out there and create like a merch store for yourselves, or like build something that like insulates you from like other creators that have to rely on brand deals and ad revenue, because I'm like, that's not always guaranteed, and even then it's becoming increasingly difficult. Like, I think most people that are watching music creators on TikTok who are, blowing up and being tremendous, is that like the amount of money you make in the music industry is very little. There's so many bands that I've come to know and have talked with personally where it's like they love making music and they love touring, but they've got their own little businesses on the side where it's or collaborations with like whiskey brands, or there's a band that I know of where they did a whiskey brand, and then what I think their drummer or guitarist runs a marketing agency for bands and artists. So it's like, they're able to sort of play in their own little wheelhouse of doing different things. One of my favorite bands of all time, their frontman is a master's in electrical engineering and it was a PhD candidate at one point. So it's like, if he were to stop doing music today, it's like he's got a bar that he owns. He's got the master's degree. He can go off and do whatever he wants to do. Um, for creators, it's always a little different, but I think it's great to see people sort of take that initiative to um, back founders, and at the same time, I think do a little bit of good in a world where really the content industry is cutthroat. It very much is.
It definitely is. And I think one thing that, is important, I've kind of started to see this even for the creators who have not as many followers. And this is something I've kind of learned early on because for me, like, I don't necessarily have the most followers on LinkedIn, but a lot of it is about the audience and a lot of it's about the kind of very specific set of people you have. And so I was kind of curious your thoughts for those creators that maybe don't have as many followers, when they build that specialized audience, how they can really kind of show the value if they're trying to do like a brand deal. Because I've heard stories of where maybe someone has like 5,000, 6,000 followers or maybe like several thousand newsletter subscribers, but because they're so specialized and because they're really they're in a certain niche, they've been able to get really cool brand deals or really cool partnerships and make a lot of money because of who their audience is.
Yeah, that's a very good question. For me, the thing that I've always told like smaller creators is, one, just be humble. I know all of us are trying to grow on social media and steal each other's thunder. Um, but like, there's a humble way of going about things, and then there's chasing the fame and the money and the attention, which there's that famous line of power and money corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
Um, and so like that's the thing I've told people. I think the other thing when it comes to being a creator is I've told people it's natural to want to network and try to build relationships with other creators. Don't make that like a core focus of like I want to build connections with these people or that person. It's like just let it happen naturally versus seeking that out. I think that's the same thing with any platform. Like with LinkedIn, one of the reasons I didn't really use LinkedIn for a very long time is LinkedIn used to be a very sales and and lead generating network. And for me, I just never really found that to be exciting. I'm like, if I'm going to invest time on a platform, it's like I want it to actually provide value to people without seeming like I'm asking for something in return. Um, and that's just me. Like, the amount of things I've done for people, even when interests weren't aligned, I think is something that like his speak to why like people respect me so much. That, and also when you've been around for 12 years and been watching the internet for 18, I think most people start to realize like, hey, there's the adult speaking in the room, albeit a virtual room. But I think on the other side of things though, that there's so many different ways I can answer this like entire question, and I'm just like, this is one of the times where I'm actually stumped. So do you mind repeating the question just so I can like reformulate thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I was kind of curious along the lines of as a creator, when you're kind of like building, like kind
Yeah,
of like building your network and you're reaching out. I think it was kind of along the lines of like specialization. I think was part of it.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think the thing is like every category of content is a specialization. Like I can't do what fitness creators do. I can't. I can probably with a little compromising of morals, be a financial YouTuber if I wanted to. Um, the I think for someone like me who's been in gaming and pop culture, um, I think what's been really nice is that like there's never a dull moment happening in entertainment. And I've always tried to like remind myself of that. Um, some of my best brand deals was like I'm in, the marketing program for Paramount Plus. So I'm frequently getting deals for promotion. I'm actively getting, asked to attend like movie premieres and screenings for blockbuster films. I tell people the only reason I very rarely can do that is because I'm like, I'm not in LA or New York. I'm like, if you're telling me like a week out, I'm like, hey, airline prices are gonna be sky high. But I think for those people that have like their own little niche that they've carved out or little corner of the internet that works for them, all the more to you. I think the people who know what they know and don't try to push further really are doing great for themselves. I think people in the like the newsletter space, newsletters are always a very tricky environment. Um, but like there's always some like level of amazingness that's getting like consistently pulled out from that little rabbit hat. But I think when just trying to build an audience, do it organically, let your personality shine, and then at the same time, like, don't be afraid to be yourself. There's still this thing of the internet where I feel like we're still in this fake it till you make it culture. And I see that more because, again, I'm on the creator side of things where now I can like dissect people and be like, something's not right here. Or, being able to tell when someone's not being as authentic. Um, but that's I guess my advice on that is just if you're trying to build an audience, build networks, connection with people, is be authentic, be engaging, be yourself, and give as much forward as you can without expecting much in return.
I honestly really like that idea of just being yourself, and I think a lot of people talk about it and they think it's so easy. But I think when people get caught up um, in the promise of social media and the promise of being able, like, being rich and famous, which is why a lot of people want to become, social media famous, they kind of lose sight of that. And I think, when I was building my brand on LinkedIn, that was one thing I really tried to do, was showcase my personality, which is why some of my top performing posts actually have been where I showcase my personality. So, like, for example, I really like Star Wars, and so I did this like Star Wars post about my journey of breaking into VC. I talked about how I got to actually play a crane game at South by Southwest, at a South by Southwest event, and that posted really well. And it's like things like this where you can let your personality and your hobbies kind of shine into what you're talking about, I think really helps bring in an audience. And I think also too, there's a creator on LinkedIn. I love to read her content, but Megan Loyce, like, she's very clear that she is a huge Taylor Swift fan, and she's talked about that a lot on her different content. And I think that's really cool because, when you're that passionate about something and you can let it shine, people really like to follow that authenticity. And that's why LinkedIn is kind of nice, because I feel like, I'm not saying everyone is 100% authentic, because obviously there's things you can't post about, but like, I feel like there is a lot of authenticity there. And this kind of brings me to my next question, because one thing you mentioned was creators kind of like wanting to meet certain people or network with certain people, and maybe sometimes people do that on LinkedIn. But I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on people kind of like reusing each other's content and protecting that content, because I've kind of seen sometimes on LinkedIn, creators will repurpose content, but then not tag the people, not give them credit. And it turns into this whole thing. And that's also just frustrating for me, because as a creator, like, if I make content, and I haven't ever had someone take my content, which is, I'm very fortunate, but I'm sure someday that'll happen. So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on this overall thing of like, oh, someone loves someone's content, but then they don't tag them or they reuse it. Like, just kind of the overall part of that, because I'm sure you've seen that happen before.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen people in my circle where that's happened as well. I think for me, I'm a little like prone to that. Like, the thing I say is with gaming content, pop culture content, or even if I was doing finance content in like a video or a streaming format, that content is regurgitated or like being redone by like everybody. And I've always had that same feeling with like thoughts that people are sharing of like ideas or like experiences, especially with LinkedIn, is like the information that you're saying is either generally like well-known information by anybody who has been in the game for enough time to know things. I think if you're one-to-one copying, then like absolutely that's like terrible. And again, like that's where again it's a lot of people that I like to say are like faking it till you make it. It's like, posting somebody else's stuff, not giving attribution, and then making yourself look like I'm this like really great person with a lot of insights does nothing. If anything, that actually hurts you more than it helps like prop you up. That's the thing I've told people myself is I'm brutally honest. When you see me say something on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram, even if I told people I'm like, I don't care about my job security as much as most people my age probably should. And it's like, because one, I'm insulated, I run my own projects, so what gives. But also it's like, you're going to get the realest form of who I am, and know that, like, if I say something, it's true and authentic, and it's me giving, like, all the passion and intensity that someone should. So that's my thoughts on things. I think with repurposing content, I think if you're doing it in the way that, like, a Gary Vee does, can be really great. And he built a significant brand, for himself. VaynerMedia is a 300 million plus, revenue ad agency a year. So there's a method to the madness of repurposing content and doing, like, strategic marketing. But I think that's the number one thing I've always told people is, like, content out there these days, there's nothing new. There's nothing original. Like, you can always build something that sort of differentiates you versus someone else, but at the end of the day, the content itself is all the same. There's a really good example of, like, most streamers, they're used to just having, like, a regular setup and gaming and putting, on a live stream. And then, I remember, I think it was a year or two ago, there was a clip that surfaced of, like, this kid who his dad had a background in pyro, and set up a, like, mini rave in the kid's bedroom, to where every time he got a kill and pressed a button, you just started having, like, miniature fireballs and strobe lights going off. And I'm like, that is, an extension of who you are and builds on that. But again, it's just, the same thing with podcasting. It's like, there are way more people out there that have been doing podcasts before I was doing it. There's going to be way more people doing it after I started. So that's my sort of take on it. A little
Yeah,
bit
no,
of a
that makes sense.
cynic take, but a take nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think, like, I mean, that makes a lot of sense too, because I think, like, sometimes, and I think sometimes, people are, it's like you're building on something existing. And I think when I think about venture capital, I think, there's different types of ideas, right? You can come up with something completely new, something completely groundbreaking, like the internet or the iPhone, things that are just change, like, people's lives completely. But then other times you have really great businesses that aren't necessarily new, but they're building on something, and they're able to come up with something, and build a good business out of it. So I think that's a really good perspective, because, like, yeah, like, sometimes it's not new. And I think that also kind of comes up with that brings me to my next question of, like, when you're thinking about this content, maybe, it is original, maybe it's only slightly original. How do you protect that? And how do you make sure you can actually, say, okay, like, this is mine? Because, this goes into the blockchain, because I did some research on this, and I was like, there's some platforms out there that can actually, like, it's just a platform where people post their content, and the blockchain protects it. It says it's original. And we could,
Yeah.
debate this a lot too, and this could be another conversation. But just briefly, like,
Yeah.
I'm curious on, like, to what extent is something original, and how do you protect it? And I think that's a loaded question, because I think there's many different opinions on this.
So my take is, whoever started the trend of the content first holds the right to say what is like, original. Or like, so, like, a good example is, there's a very old YouTube channel. Most people don't remember it, but it was called Lonely Girl 15. It was the first ever web show. It was created
I
on
was gonna say
YouTube.
that sounds very familiar.
Yeah. And like, the thing is, this sort of dates me, because I was watching YouTube in, like, late 2006, when all this was taking off with Lonely Girl. But, like, they built an entire franchise of different interconnected shows, and weaved, like, in and out, and built, like, the first ARGs before, those were, like, a big thing to do. Or taking a web show and pairing it with a television show, right? Like the creators of Lonely Girl went on to create like a web um, companion series to Harper's Island, which was on CBS back in like 2007, 2008, I want to say. And so like I've always said, like those people, like you get the claim of like this is original. Everything afterwards is like influenced because somebody else went out there and did that. So like content itself is not original anymore. Um, I think like there, like there's a reason why you see so many YouTubers doing faceless channels is somebody else did it first and now everyone wants to do it. The same thing with podcasting or like with Vine. Like, Vine was this sort of place where everyone, did their own fun little thing. But again, it was very much of like, oh, I see the Logan Pauls of the world doing this, or the Charlie D'Amelio's doing dancing on TikTok. Now I want to dance as well and show off the fun side of me. So, there's nothing is original anymore in content. I think what protects that is your personality, and like who you are as a person. I think that's what like does the most is you look at um television shows all like the same is there's so many different television shows that are influenced by either a writer's previous writing credits or by a concept that they saw on TV. It's sort of a trope where I guarantee you anyone has sat down and watched a TV series and thought, oh, I could write something so much better than this. And that means that like you're inspired by that content. That content's not original. Unless it's something, even like comic books and like movies and television shows. It's like you're taking source material that somebody else wrote and adapting it in your own little way to create what you're doing. So I think that's my stance on creativity and like content and originality is like nothing's original anymore. I wish that that was the case of like something new could be done consistently, but the sort of again paradoxical problem is that once something takes off and somebody realizes it, then there's 5 or 10 other people trying to figure out like how to do that, and that's not a bad thing. I've done that the same with multiple businesses where I'm like, okay, I see so and so company running this project. How can I do that? I think even with startups, no idea is original anymore. There's at least a dozen companies out there doing banking for startups. And it's not just the big financial institutions. Think of all the fintech platforms out there that are sort of carrying that trend. Same with entertainment. Like I'm building a brand right now for young adults and millennials because all of traditional entertainment and legacy media has abandoned that demographic, and yet people want content for that demographic. So it's one of those things where I'm aware that there was the CW and Freeform and the channels before them that created content. There's Netflix that still plays in that space, and I have to go, okay, I know that you're there. What, like, how can I do this? With paying a little bit of homage to the people that came before me.
With that, I just have one last question. Trying to stand out across all of these, startups, new ideas, all the content creators trying to come up with original content when, there's not a lot of room for that based on what you said. How can all of these different types of people avoid burnout?
Whew, that's a good one. I mean, I like to say that you're asking the best person for that because, like, I grew up with autism, so like mental stability and like burnout has always been something I've dealt with. It like Um, I think the biggest thing is like knowing when it's okay to take a step back. I think the problem is that like in TikTok, YouTube, um, a lot of social media platforms, it is true that we're in an attention economy and people feel like if you don't post, often, if you decide to take a month break from doing content, that could be detrimental, and it can be. Um, but at the same time, like it's it's very much a needed thing. So like myself, I take breaks every so often from streaming and doing content. I've also explained to people I've been doing this for 12 years and I'm at a point where I just want to make gaming content and not have to keep up with, high school me who was cranking out like a video every other day or two videos every day and, trying to like go through that whole process again. I probably could, there'd be some sacrifices on the business side or, time management, but for me, I think that that's like my biggest thing is like knowing when it's okay to step back, and also asking your community to have enough trust in you that when you come back that like things are going to be the same. um and again, that's also the trust of that creator asking their community, hey, stick with me. I I think that's important. I've had a lot of creators that I've worked with, small, medium sized, large in between, that they've all experienced burnout. And I tell people, um, especially with running like a content collective, is I understand work, school, family comes first, and even mental stability on top of that. And I've told people, if you want to take some time to relax, like don't have to create content. I'm not holding you to any requirements. The same thing when I'm talking to just creators in general is I'm like, there are dark days. Smile, keep your head up high, and just like relax. Um, for me, I'm listening to ASMR at least twice a day because one, I can't sleep, but also like it helps me relax. At a time when like um in my life where it's like everything is always on and off the rails. So that's my answer to that.
No, that makes sense, and I definitely can respect that. I think taking breaks is very valuable. With my posting schedule and how active I've been on LinkedIn, it's definitely hard sometimes, and so I think that's a great message. I think a great place to kind of end my side of my questions for you. So I'll pass it back off to you.
Awesome. Going from there, one of the things that I think is unique about your career is you created sort of your own venture group and your own, sort of outlet to do what you're comfortable with. How much of that was influenced of not wanting to work for like a larger VC, and sort of have like the freedom to do whatever you wanted to do?
Great question, and this is also where I want to clarify as well. So I still am like working for like larger VCs. A lot of it's more of like, so I still have something on the side to have some
Yeah.
freedom, and so I think that's kind of why I did that, because I wanted that freedom on the side to be able to say, okay, I'm still doing what I'm passionate about. I have, I have some stability to be able to work for these VC firms, work for these startups. But then on the side, I can still have my own little, or where I've organized my different like roles to be able to give back to the community. Because I think for me, that was so important of like, hey, I really love this so much. I want to give back. And so being able to kind of explain to people, hey, like I love this, but I also want something for myself, right? Because I think that's part of building your own brand is you want to always have something regardless of where you're at in your career. But I think a lot of it too is the fact that because I've had so many experiences, I've really struggled to explain them. And so I essentially created that to be able to kind of organize everything I've done and say, okay, like if you go through my LinkedIn and you're like, wow, I'm really confused by everything you've done, you can just go to that personal brand and say, okay, it has a list of all the different companies I've worked for. And so that way it's kind of a way to make it like, it's when people are like, make it make sense. That's my
Yeah.
answer to that question.
No, I feel that like I certainly myself have had to do that. Like again, I think having like a non-traditional, like still like actively in like a 2-year degree program after 6 years of being out of high school, people are like, "How did you go from content creation on the internet to everything you're doing now?" And I'm like, I don't know. There's days where I'm still like, how am I here? How am I still here like 12 years later? I've joked that the terrible thing is like there's that quote of never meet your idols. And by the time I was 17, I'd already met my idols twice, and now I think the counts at like 3 or 4 times for both of them, and I'm like, that's a dangerous thing, and I'm like, I uniquely aware that I'm cursed. Um, but like, I think there's something that's special though about like having your own sort of outlet to do, your own things and really build. Um, because you look at what some people have done. With especially female founders and female investors building communities like Chief that are all just for females, and the same thing is like really seeing what you built with your own sort of venture project. I think is nothing short of of extraordinary. um that, and also, you're a lot braver than I am. I couldn't talk at South by Southwest. I'd probably freeze in my shoes, before even getting on the stage. So like, kudos to that. I guess, what is something that you wish you could have told yourself looking back when you were starting out on this journey, knowing everything that you know now?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. Definitely a good way to kind of like close things. And I think what I would say to my younger self is to not really care what other people think. And just really just, I mean, a lot of it is just be yourself, but also just be proud of yourself and not like question why you are the way you are and just accept it, because I've had a lot of experiences where people will doubt me, people will say you can't do this. And not only do I prove them wrong, but I like blow it out of the water in a really good way. And so I think just like my advice is just be confident in yourself and your journey, and really like it's very cliche, but focus on the journey, not the destination, because I am very like I've learned so much in my journey. And of course it's nice when you accomplish something, but you learn so much along the way. And just everything that's happened to me has happened for a reason. And it's taught me a lot of different things, made me very strong. And so I think just like being confident in yourself and just not worrying like, okay, why am I like this? Like I think honestly it's just that's just my kind of like my stream of consciousness thought of like, hey, like just be proud of yourself and know that it's going to work out even if you don't know how it's going to work out.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on the podcast. I hope everything goes well for you. My last and final question, someone who's a California native, you being from Texas, people are gonna hate me for asking this question, but what is the better burger place? Whataburger or In and Out?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm actually the reason I'm gonna say In and Out is because I actually haven't been to the other place a lot, honestly. And I just have more memories of In and Out, which I think is really funny considering I'm from Texas, that I'm saying that. But I am like a big burger person. I like love meat. Like it's a big thing. Like I love really expensive steak and I love burgers. I could talk for hours about that's another like I love food. I love really high quality food. So yeah, I have to say In and Out. But there's also some really good local places in Austin too, like P. Terry's, Hop Dottie's, like some places that are only here. So that's also what I would say. But between them, In and Out.
And for those that are listening, you know where to direct your food criticism at.
Yes.
that's the thing I've always said is, like, it, there's always a conversation in the gaming space of like burger places, and I'm like, In-N-Out is better. I'm like, I'll die on this hill. Every time I go on a trip, if there's an In-N-Out in that city, I'm like, we're getting it. My vice is straight Coke and Buffalo Wild Wings. That's where you get me warmed up in the heart. So, but no, again, I appreciate you hopping on to the podcast, and for people that want to find you and follow, your progress, feel free to plug the social media links.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd say just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to always take the time to chat with anybody. Really open to conversations and networking, honestly. I'm as long as I'm available, I pretty much take most calls.
Awesome. Well, Sarah, enjoy the weekend, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.